Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
Welcome to Books That Make You. I'm Desiree Duffy, your host, and we are talking about how writing is like having kids. Yeah, children. You don't believe me? Well, you soon will. For many writers, creating a story, making that narrative that is both structured and unique, it's like nurturing a child. It is bringing something into the world. Authors often become attached to their writing. The characters created, they can seem like our closest friends or our closest enemies. Part of a writer's life, their history and their personal experience, it all goes into crafting their tales. And it can be quite daunting sharing a book with the world, a book that is judged, one that is loved or hated, read and reread, or just cast aside. And guess what? A book doesn't even need to be written for mass market. It can truly be something personal. And I'll touch more on that in a little bit. Right now, I'd like to introduce you to our guest. His name is Michael Chapman. Michael is a writer, he's a father, and he has a wonderful website where he supports fellow writers and authors. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
You're welcome. So tell me, what do you think? Am I right? Is writing akin to having kids? Is it, something that it almost feels like we've given birth or we're nurturing something?
Yeah, I think it's like having kids in a lot of different ways. I think the first one that springs to mind is that both things are a lot harder than I ever expected, a lot harder than they look from the outside. You see somebody, let's say a friend or someone that you know, and they write a book and they publish it either through traditional channels or they self-publish it, and you look at it and you think, wow, that must have been a simple process. And you see parents with their nice kids out on the street and you think, wow, that doesn't look so hard. And then you start doing something like that yourself, and then you realize exactly how much love, care and attention goes into it, and how much time as well.
Oh my gosh, yes. The time commitment. I think that's maybe something that so many writers underestimate. They think that, I can write 1,000 words in an hour, but then they don't realize it's the rewriting and it's structure and it's plotting and it's everything else that goes into it.
I think the other way is like having kids. Like you say, it's not enough just to create something. You can't just sit down and write 50,000, 100,000, 150,000 words. There's then all the aftercare. There's the editing. There's the submitting it to various places. There's the formatting. It's not done once it's created. Your job continues.
Mm-hmm. And it's watching it leave the nest, so to speak, as well, when that book actually does hit the shelf. And you no longer have control over it. Much in the same way that when your child moves out of the house, you can't tell them what to do anymore. You can't correct them. You can't necessarily guide them the way you could. And it's the same thing with a book. It's out there and it's on its own and it has its own life after that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, none of my children are sort of old enough to be leaving the house, but they are old enough to sort of start leaving the nest a little, start going off to school, that sort of thing. And you can't protect them. You do your best, and then they walk out the door, they go to school, and that's the end of your involvement. Like publishing a book, you've written it, it gets published, and after that there's nothing you can do to protect it. You can't coddle it where it's just you as the single reader. It's out there for others to see.
One of my favorite things that I always think about, especially, and it's something that I'll tell to writers where it seems like they don't want to let go of their writing. They just want to keep editing. They get that nervousness when they put it out into the world. And it's a true story that I heard about Mark Twain, the author who wrote Huckleberry Finn and so many others. He used to walk into libraries, grab copies of his books off the shelf, and start redlining, editing them, because it was that thing. He still wanted to keep going. He couldn't let go. So So tell me, why do you think that writers they seem to pour so much into their craft? I mean, are we crazy? Are we mad?
I don't know. Speaking for myself, I've always wanted to tell stories. I have always, ever since I was little and I started reading books, I've always wanted to tell my own stories. So for me, it's kind of been a lifelong thing, really, to have ideas and to want to communicate them to others. I don't know whether other people might sort of grow into it as they get older, but like I say, for me, it's been years in the making.
Now, one of the things that a lot of people assume is that when an author writes a book, that they're doing it so that the world can see it. They do it for a mass market, to make book sales, to become a famous author. But writing is a very personal thing. And like in your case, can you tell us about the book that you wrote for your family and friends and what that experience was like?
Yes, certainly. When my wife and I were expecting daughter number 2, I became convinced on the run up to the birth that was going to be the end of me writing, that I wouldn't have enough time to ever write again. So I decided to sort of go out with a bit of a flourish, and that what I would do is I'd write a book. Because I'd always written bits of books before, I'd sort of written, 50,000 words here, 75,000 words there, never completed a project. And I thought, what I'll do? I will finally complete something, because this is like my last hurrah. This is my chance to do it. Mm-hmm. So my friends and family suggested, I was going to say random words, but sometimes they picked incredibly awkward words for me to base a story around, and then I used like a random number generator to pick a genre. And I thought that would be a nice way to finish off my writing career. That I'd challenged myself to write a western and a love story and a sea story, all based around these random words. So on the run-up to the birth, I wrote this book and I published it as a bit of a celebration, just as my second daughter was born. And really, it was just a sort of almost like a little bit of a private celebration for family and friends. It's that story is sort of very personal to me, so I didn't really think that perhaps it would be for a wider audience, but. No, I think my family and friends appreciated that. I think they sort of liked being able to join in the celebration.
That is such an amazing story, and I can't believe you used random words, a random generator to pick the genre. Tell me more about that. Like, how did that work, and what were the words that were picked? How did that get all crafted?
Well, some of the more awkward combinations spring to mind. Like a friend of mine picked the word biplane. I think he just picked that random word, and I went on the random number generator, and it picked up Wild West, which was an extremely awkward combination because of the years that the Wild West was around, and the years that biplanes, like fighter planes, were around. But I did find that there were about 2 or 3 years when those two things did overlap. So I was able to sort of set a Western story about an old rickety, broken down prototype plane. But that took a lot of thinking. Another one of my friends to try and completely to try and break my spirit picked the word transubstantiation.
Oh my!
Which then got matched up with a quantum detective story as a genre, and that took some doing as well. It was a real challenge, actually, but it was a lot of fun trying to accommodate both the sometimes horrible words that were picked for me and a genre that perhaps I'd never written in before, because some of those genres that I wrote in were not my comfort zone.
This is fascinating, and I have to imagine that process it had to put your creativity into overdrive, because you were forced to think of things in different ways. Like your brain was forced to go in all of these different directions and make connections between two unseemingly very different things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I tend to naturally gravitate towards sort of more speculative fiction. So I don't know, a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of sci-fi, a little bit of horror, really whatever takes my fancy. And to have to try and write a black comedy or a sea story, that was really really stretching to me. So even after the book was published and distributed to my friends and family, I still think the exercise had value for me as a writer.
I love it. Is it possible for us to do a sample? Like, can we randomly pick words and do it? Like, do you have the ability to do this here?
What, right now? Okay.
Yeah, just for fun, just to see what we would come up with.
I'll tell you what, go for it. And then if we talk about a different topic for a couple of minutes and just give my brain time to work, and I'll see what I can do.
Okay. I mean, is this on your computer? Is that how you do it, or how what's the mechanism to pick?
Oh, it was friend's choice what the word was, and then I think I picked the Wikipedia genre list.
Okay, so if I picked the word, and then you could do the Wikipedia.
Okay.
Should we do it that way?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and give me a second, too, because I'm going to actually do a Google search here for something. Another thing I wanted to touch on is when we create characters, that I have so many author friends and people I know who describe their characters like their friends, and that they seemingly come to life and they start talking to them. Quite literally, this is a manifestation that a lot of them feel. Is that anything that you have experience with? Have your characters ever just come right out and told you how a story should go, or told you what they want to do?
Sometimes it really depends on how much of a plan I have ahead of time. Sometimes I have had a very fixed idea in mind about where I want the story to go, and the character will not cooperate with that situation because it's not what they would do. Sometimes that leads to an interesting outcome where taking the story somewhere where I never expected it to go, and other times it means I have to delete the character and try and rewrite the story with someone a bit more accommodating.
Oh, I love it. Okay, I think I have something for you. Purple Jingle Bells. Purple Jingle Bells. Purple Jingle Bells, yeah.
Purple Jingle Bells. That's going to be a bit of a challenge. Okay, can you give me a number off the top of your head?
42.
42. Well, the list that I've got is somewhat shorter than that, so I'm just going to bounce up and down a few times until I get to what's number 42? Horror.
Ooh.
Okay. Purple Jingle Bells and horror. This may require a little bit of thought. Okay. Next, can I have another question while I try and think about how to match Purple Jingle Bells and horror?
Okay. By the way, I must say that horror speculative fiction, that's my favorite as well. And
cool.
I do think that no matter what genre you're writing in, or if you're writing literary, story is still story. Characters are still characters. Plotting is still plotting. Yes, if you are in a genre, you should stick to the rules of that genre. That's what happens there. You kind of have to adhere to, what the norms are, because that's what the readers are going to come to expect. But I do sometimes take a little bit of an issue with people who want to look down at certain genres. Horror comes to mind. Horror tends to be something that people will make assumptions about. And especially nowadays, there's some really interesting horror out there. I feel a lot of writers today are getting much more cerebral. It's not always about just blood and guts and splatter. I think that, even in the world of film and television, there's some really interesting things that are going on within horror and some of the subgenres.
For me personally, I really dislike films, TV programs, and books that do have a lot of splatter in, because I don't find that frightening. That doesn't really touch anything me. I find it a bit repulsive. I don't tend to like it very much. But for me, horror, I think, needs to touch on some of the things that we're all frightened of, at our core. So things like the dark, things like the unknown, things like losing something about yourself, losing some part of your personality or your memory. I think for me, the horror that I enjoy is maybe something less less gory and more like goes to some of those fundamental fears.
I agree. So who are you reading right now, or what horror writers would you recommend?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question. Funnily enough, the book that I'm reading at the moment isn't a horror book. I have an author friend who's just published a new book, and it has arrived through the post today. I hadn't quite realised the size of it, but it's about 4 inches thick, so I think that's going to keep me busy.
Oh my!
Keep me busy for quite a while. Yes, yeah. I hadn't realised it was quite as long as that. I'm just hoping he doesn't ask for a review or anything anytime soon. I mean, everyone goes to sort of Stephen King, don't they, as sort of a bit of a touchstone. I like Stephen King's work. I'm just not a big fan of his later stuff. Mm-hmm. I think for me the best thing that he's written that I've read is The Shining, which I know was amongst one of the first things that he wrote. Because again, a lot of the sort of horror aspects of that are quite sort of fundamental, like the main character slowly losing his mind over the course of a book. So, slowly being driven mad, which is something which I think is something that people worry about at their core, that perhaps they are changing as a person and not for the better.
I agree. Most horror is confined in one way or another. It's the monster in the house, right? So with The Shining, what I always really liked was the fact that they're in this huge mansion. So it seems like you're not really confined, right? Because you've got this whole place to yourself. So there's this feeling of you can explore, you can go into this huge kitchen, you can eat all of this food, you can hang out in this grand ballroom. But then yet you are so incredibly isolated. So I always loved that juxtaposition of how confined and trapped they really were compared to the fact that they had all this room to run around and explore. So how, both of those things were working at the same time.
Yeah, it's quite a clever idea, isn't it?
Exactly.
I quite like as well that the strong element of tragedy that's in it, sort of from the father character's angle. Because at the start of the book, he's aware that he is perhaps not a very good man, that he has lots of deep flaws, but he is trying to be a better man. And over the course of the book, that's lost, and he becomes abusive, starts drinking again, all that sort of thing. So it's sort of tragic to see him morph from being somebody who is trying to sort of seek self-improvement and redemption to somebody who is a monster by the end of the book.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is when the thing or the person or the situation that you trust turns against you, that's one of the real delicious elements of horror as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me, you have, I love your website, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
And you have a series called The Saturday Interviews, and you support other authors. Tell us about that and where you came up with the idea to do that.
Well, sometime after the birth of daughter number 3, I realised that I was obviously very, very short on time. So after daughter number 2 was born, I was able to keep writing. Get up a little bit earlier in the morning, go to sleep a little bit later at night so I could keep going. And when daughter number 3 came along, I realised that I was seriously short on time. And I've got a lot of sort of writer friends on Twitter, and I looked at what they were doing. I've just written 500 words in a cafe, and I felt like I was missing out. I wanted to be part of the community. I wanted to contribute. I wanted to have discussions about wonderful ideas that I'd had. But obviously there was nothing that I could do. And then I thought, well, what if I could support other authors in this way? What if I could find out not just the stories that they were writing, but the stories about them as well, and I could contribute in that way. And I had a talk with a good friend of mine. In fact, the guy who wrote that book. This is his sequel, the brick that came through my letterbox today. He very kindly said that he would be interviewed by me. So I had no track record with interviewing anybody. So he took a bit of a leap of faith with me, and it kind of went from there.
I love it. So now you got me curious. Who is your friend, and what is his brick-ish book about?
It's an old friend of mine. His name is Sean McMahon, He's a very talented writer, actually. He writes. It's difficult to describe, but I'd sort of describe them as being they're time travel books.
Oh.
But if you can imagine maybe something like Groundhog Day, but with like a sort of a darker aspect to it, and funny in places. It's kind of like that. It's difficult to define, really. He writes sort of humour very fluidly, like the sort of quite quippy humour you get in a Marvel film. He's got a real talent for that, and making characters stand out from the page.
Oh, I love it. So tell us, since you have this rich well of writer friends and you're doing the interviews, are there any gems out there, any books or authors where you're like, oh my, this person is going places, people need to read this now?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Well, first of all, I do have to sort of mention my friend, because the response to both of his books has been sort of extremely positive. Lots of audience engagement. There have been other authors. Katie Hageman has written a number of books in different genres. She's very talented as well. So she's written some recently written some sort of speculative fiction stuff. Sarah Bailey is an author who I really admire. Actually, she writes sort of like a kind of urban fantasy, paranormal kind of stuff, and her work rate and her work ethic is absolutely phenomenal. I could go on and on. And there's a gentleman I know called Paul Blake. He writes amazing thrillers. He wrote a thriller like kind of like John le Carré did, like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, that kind of sort of spy orientated stuff. He wrote one set in Berlin that was sort of really evoked a strong sense of place. So there are a lot of I've been really fortunate in meeting a lot of really talented people.
I love it. So tell me, how are we doing with Purple Jingle Bells and horror? Is that working?
I'm not going to lie. I'm drawing a blank at the moment, but hopefully by the end of the interview, I will have something. I feel like I've been. That's the word. I've been ambushed. I've been ambushed on an interview.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. It's all for fun. It's all for fun. No pressure whatsoever.
No. I joke.
Now I've got to ask you. I'll circle back to. So you're from London? Is that where you live?
Oh, just a little ways north, out in the countryside in Suffolk.
So you wrote, one of the words that came up for you was a Western, an American Western, I assume. Was that, did you feel that was a stretch because, you're not in America? Or do you feel that there was enough that you could pull from doing research for you to write about that?
I think I was very lucky that none of my family and friends were from America either, so they couldn't go and check a lot of this stuff. I've done a little bit of reading around the Wild West, but I'm not going to lie, a lot of the stuff that I wrote was kind of riffing on the westerns that I've seen. I'm quite a big fan of the good, the bad, and the ugly, for a few dollars more, that sort of thing. So it was just fun playing around with some of those tropes for just a few thousand words and turning it into a fun story.
Oh, I bet. And in all honesty, there's so much embellishment that has been done with the Western genre that virtually most of the tropes and the things that you hear are very much cliche and not really based on a lot of fact anyway.
I could believe that. One thing that astonished me when I did start doing a little bit of research before I wrote the short story was how little time the Wild West existed for, because you sort of think of it as almost being a bit of an eternal thing with these sort of dusty towns and sheriffs and outlaws and all that sort of thing, but it didn't really last terribly long. And it also kind of shocked me how late the Wild West, at least the last vestiges, lasted as well. So almost, into the modern era, up to almost the First World War. So that was another little shock to me as well.
So tell me, what are you working on next? I know your daughters keep you very busy, but do you got something in the works?
Yeah, I'm writing a story, actually. It's a funny story. Sorry, it's not a humorous story. It's a funny story how I got to this point. I was on Twitter and I saw I saw that there was a competition going about the theme of writing a story on the theme of darkness, and I was kind of a little bit sort of perplexed by that, because how can darkness be like a proper theme? It's really very broad. I mean, and I sort of sat there and I stewed on it and I grumbled a bit about it being a theme. But then I came up with a kind of almost like a weird kind of horror-y kind of idea around that aspect and how it relates to food, because that was what made it particularly weird, sort of combining the idea of darkness and food.
Ooh, I love it. And you and we met on Twitter.
We did.
It sounds like you use Twitter a lot to connect with people, for inspiration, for community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my friends on Twitter have recommended that I spread my wings and branch into Instagram and that sort of thing. But I am not going to lie, I find keeping up on Twitter enough of a challenge with the girls and with my writing and all the rest of it. So I'm just mainly on Twitter, but I find it a great place for contacting other authors. You know, just finding out that the struggles and the doubts that you go through when you write aren't personal to you, that everyone goes through them as well, that everyone looks at a piece of work they've done and thinks at some point, oh my goodness, this is no good, I just need to delete the whole thing and start again. So it's nice to connect with other people who are kind of in the same position, and then, you know, they offer you advice and hopefully one day you can pass it along to somebody else who's just starting.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And the advice I give, a lot of times authors ask me, what social media should they be on? How should they do it? And some people take to Twitter, some people don't. And my advice is always to go with the one or the ones that you feel comfortable in, that you want to use, because Twitter is a different animal completely than Instagram. If you're more visual and more into posting pictures, and Instagram is where you need to be. If you want a large, really fast, I feel like Twitter goes really fast, like the conversations can just clip along, then I feel like Twitter is the place to be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it does. I guess Twitter as a platform does have its drawbacks. I mean, I make sure that I'm very careful not to stray from the friendliness of book Twitter into anything like politics Twitter, because it all gets quite rabid when you go off that way. And I quite like my book friends, but yeah, it's nice. I like it as a way of connecting with other people. But like I say, I wish I had time to sort of branch out a little bit more.
True, very true. So tell us, where can people find you on Twitter, your website? Where can we learn more about you and your writing? My website is
mochapman.com, and there I have some of the short stories that I've won competitions with, and I have the back catalogue of the Saturday interviews, all the way from the very first one. Actually, I think it might actually be, and let me just check, it is almost exactly a year since my very first interviews. This is like my interview series' first birthday.
Oh, it's an anniversary. I didn't realize that.
It is.
That's pretty cool. Well, congratulations on the website. And tell us really quick about the awards that you won for your short stories.
Okay, cool. I have won a couple of national competitions for my short stories. I won a first place for almost like a first-person narrative short story, and I won a regional contest for some crime fiction, and I got a second place for some sort of pulp fiction style horror that I wrote. So yeah, I think I've been very lucky.
I'm sure it's not just luck. I'm sure there's a lot of talent backing up all those awards.
That's kind of you to say. Thank you.
You are so welcome. Any closing thoughts before we sign out today?
It's been great to be on here. I just realised I didn't say my Twitter handle when I was talking about my website. I'm on Twitter at Rubrekian. RUBREKIAN.
Excellent. And yes, I encourage everybody to follow Michael on Twitter and, follow the writing community or follow the Am Reading hashtag to learn more about books and discover new authors and find new books to read. Michael, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for asking.
My name is Desiree Duffy, and thank you everyone for joining us today on Books That Make You. And you can find out more on our website, and that's booksthatmakeyou.com. You can also follow on Facebook and Instagram. Until next time, enjoy all the books that make you who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.